Now, the federal government has confirmed US President Donald Trump asked Scott Morrison to help investigate the origins of an inquiry into Russian election interference. The New York Times says President Trump pushed Mr Morrison during a recent phone call to help a Justice Department inquiry gather information that would discredit the Mueller probe. Katie Benner is one of the New York Times journalists who broke the story. She joins us now from Washington. Katie Benner, welcome. So what can you tell us about what you found out?
Sure. So we found out that President Trump had asked Prime Minister Morrison for help in this Justice Department inquiry, into the roots of the Russian investigation and a broad inquiry into why the U.S. intelligence agencies decided to survey the Trump campaign in 2016. So President Trump made the call at the behest of our attorney, William Barr.
And so he asked for help with looking into this issue. Would it be fair to say the president pressured the Australian Prime Minister in this call, or you can't say that?
You know, from the reporting that we have, I don't think the president pressured Prime Minister Morrison in the same way that he seemed to pressure the Ukrainian President Zelensky. I think it was a very different kind of phone call where he said, listen, my Attorney General, Bill Barr, and his team are going to be in touch with you. Could you help out? I think it was a very different tone than we saw in the Ukrainian the Ukrainian president's phone call with Mr. Trump.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how much you can tell us because you've obviously got to protect your sources. But have you seen a transcript of this call, or did you just hear about it from someone who's heard about it secondhand?
You know, so we originally heard about this call we originally heard about this call from somebody who was alarmed that the transcript of the call was treated in much the same way that the transcript of the call with the Ukrainian president was treated. So that is how it came to our attention. Now, other officials in the administration have verified that this call happened, and they've said that indeed, you know, it was a request for help, and that Prime Minister Morrison was asked to help the Justice Department. But the reason why it came to anybody's attention is because it was treated in this very unusual manner, in that it was sort of put in a private server reserved usually for national security information, which is something that's been happening, it sounds like, with some regularity at the White House because of how unorthodox some of Mr. Trump's conversations can be.
And what do you make of the fact that it was treated that way?
You know, we're not sure what to make of it. We are getting reporting that this is something that was happening with great frequency with a lot of Mr. Trump's communications, simply because they have been unorthodox and they have raised heads, and because in the early days of the administration, lots and lots of his communications were being leaked by different people within his own administration. And so it seemed like this was somewhat of a regular practice.
And this, I'm not sure what you can tell us on this, but this was leaked by someone in his own administration as well?
We can only say that it's somebody who had knowledge of the call and knowledge of its treatment.
Right. And what can you tell us about the response of the Australian Prime Minister during this conversation?
You know, I think that it's really interesting that the Australian Prime Minister, that he's put out a statement saying that Australia has always been willing to help the United States in any sort of law enforcement investigation. And I think, you know, I have no reason to doubt your Prime Minister. We have seen publicly that President Trump has criticized Prime Minister Morrison and others and said, you know, I really need all these world leaders to help. I think that ever since then, the Prime Minister's posture has been, we are willing to help, which I think is probably it's not a bad way to deflect criticism from President Trump, which is to say that we are willing and able.
And so did you see or hear the Australian Prime Minister's response? Can you take us to any more detail of what he said in response?
You know, so in response, I think that what we have seen is the statement that the Prime Minister's office put out, which was, we have always been willing to help. Interestingly, there's also a letter that has now come out that was written by the Prime Minister in May in response to some public statements by Mr. Trump saying, you know, world leaders, including the Australian Prime Minister, need to be helpful in this inquiry. But in May, there was a letter sent to the U.S. that said, indeed, that Australia would be willing and able.
And I guess the discussion now is the appropriateness of the US President making this call and suggesting this to an Australian Prime Minister. What do you make of the appropriateness of this?
Sure. This is not the first time we're told by former Justice Department officials from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, that it's not the first time and it's not unheard of for the president to reach out to other leaders to say, we are working on an investigation and we will need help from your law enforcement agencies. That's not unusual. What makes this unusual is that it's clear that for the president, I won't say that for Attorney General Barr, but for the president, he definitely sees this investigation as a way to clear his name, as a way to legitimize his 2016 win, and as a way to sort of clear away any clouds or shadows that he won because of help from a foreign power, and to say that it was wrong for the U.S. intelligence agencies to ever surveil him or to ever look into his campaign in the first place.
So the fact that he's got a personal interest in this?
It makes it highly unusual.
And do you expect we could end up seeing some kind of transcript of this conversation?
I think there'll be pressure for the U.S. government to produce a transcript, and I think there'll be pressure on the government to produce a variety of transcripts as more and more details of different calls with different world leaders sort of start to leak out. Again, this was brought to our attention because somebody was very surprised by the treatment of the call. So it's very possible that there was nothing completely outrageous said on the call, but the treatment of it sort of raised eyebrows. And I'm sure that that's not the only call, it's not the only transcript where government officials have had that response.
Yeah. And Katie Bennett, can you just clarify for us with calls that the president makes, can he expect that they will be monitored by people outside the White House or not? What's the legal setup there for a president and his right to assume that his calls with other world leaders are kept within the White House rather than being secretly recorded by intelligence agencies?
Well, I think that there is an expectation the president's calls will be treated with sort of the seriousness and respect that they deserve. There are people on the calls, usually in the Situation Room, with global leaders. It can range from only a very tiny handful of people if they're very, very sensitive or deal with national security issues, to a larger array of people who are transcribing or helping out in some way with the call. That is to be expected. But again, I think there has always been an expectation that conversations between world leaders would be, closely held and respected as private. What we've seen here, though, is this extraordinary whistleblower report saying that at least one conversation with the Ukrainian president was not appropriate, which has led to pressure to start to release some of the information around some of the president's communications.
And it would seem that came from someone in the intelligence services. Are you in a position to clarify whether the person who witnessed this and spoken to you is from the intelligence services or from within the White House?
So that's not something that we can say.
Yeah.
But we can say that for the whistleblower who has filed a report and had previously filed a complaint with the general counsel of the CIA, we know that that person was a CIA officer.
Yeah. Okay, Katie Bennett, thanks so much for talking to us from Washington.